Picture this. It's June 2026. You sip unfiltered water from a stagnant well, because that's the cleanest water around, and you don't want to get dehydrated. Should you maybe turn on your air conditioning? Well, that would require electricity, something you don't have. Shade? The big tree in your yard was uprooted and washed away when Russia blew up the dam and flooded the town 3 years ago. Dinner tonight will probably be canned food from dwindling supplies, which you're lucky enough to still have, because some of your neighbors starved to death in the winter of 2025. That might sound crazy. Why did they stay in town if they were starving? Well, the road is full of landmines, and even if you can weave around them, a Russian drone might drop on you, or a Russian soldier might shoot you. To stay is to starve, and to leave is to risk violent death. This is not a hypothetical. This is what's happening in the Ukrainian town of Oleshky right now. I'm Belokur, reporting to you from Kyiv, and this week, on the 3-year anniversary of Russia destroying the Kakhovka Dam, we're going to look at the egregious humanitarian crisis currently unfolding in Oleshky, a frontline town that's seen years of occupation, ecocide, and systematic attempts to erase the town's Ukrainian identity. In conditions on par with the siege and starvation of cities like Sarajevo and Leningrad and Gaza, the situation in Oleshky is one that warrants immediate action. Action that international bodies are slow to take. Archaeological records show that humans have been living in Oleshky since the Bronze Age. Its location on the Dnipro River made it a natural port of call on the route from Kyiv to Constantinople, and the region around it is home to one of the largest sand dune formations in Europe. In its many centuries of life, the town has outlived multiple states that laid claim to it. From the Byzantines to the Ottomans to the Cossacks to the Soviets, Oleshky has borne witness to centuries of growth, collapse, and war, and it's survived all of them thus far. But it might not survive what Russia is currently doing to it. This was what Oleshky looked like before Russia invaded. Before 2022, the town's population was over 24,000 people. Tourists came to ride horses on the sand dunes or to visit the painted home of artist Polina Raiko. But invasion came swiftly, and Russia captured Oleshky on the first day of the full-scale invasion. They held on to it even when Ukraine liberated the nearby regional capital, Kherson, in November of 2022. Ukraine was able to push Russian forces back from the western bank of the Dnipro River, but consequently, Russia has turned eastern bank towns like Oleshky into launching points for close-range strikes at Kherson City and other towns on the west bank. Then, in the summer of 2023, Russia blew up the nearby Kakhovka Dam, creating widespread flooding that submerged Oleshky and other villages in the region. Many analysts believe that the dam's destruction was intended to hinder a potential Ukrainian counteroffensive that could have pushed Russia further out of southern Ukraine. That painted home of Polina Raiko, along with many others, was lost. Exact death numbers aren't known because occupation authorities obviously aren't publicizing them, but an AP investigation placed the number in the hundreds. And many more lost everything they owned, from their homes to their passports. And that's a particularly important point because documentation is a key weapon of Russia's occupation. After manufacturing life-threatening crises in Oleshky, Russian forces have denied financial and medical aid to those not in possession of Russian passports. Now, ostensibly, the residents who didn't have a Russian passport were supposed to apply for one through occupation authorities. But for people who lost their homes, their birth certificates, and their other ID in the flood, this wasn't necessarily an option. According to local authorities, there are no working administrative offices or ATMs in Oleshky itself, which means the bureaucratic parts of the process needed to be carried out in a neighboring town, and even then, processing times could stretch into the months. Russia is systematically manufacturing humanitarian crises knowing that people will die, and then making documented allegiance to Russia the condition for survival. There could be a word for that, but we'll get into it later. Now, you might say, this all sounds horrible, but why are we talking about this particular town in this particular week? You know, this is the 5th year of war for everyone in Ukraine, and Russia occupies many small towns. What makes things so bad and so dire for Oleshky? First, there's the unfortunate combination of its strategic location and Russia's inability to advance on the ground. At this point, Russia isn't really trying to recapture Kherson City. It's just trying to make it unlivable. So Oleshky's position as a close launch point remains valuable to Russian forces. There's no indication that that dynamic will shift greatly in the foreseeable future, But at the same time, advancements in Ukrainian drone technology are making it increasingly dangerous for Russian troops to operate on Oleshky's actual streets. So they've been withdrawing into the forests around the town where there's more tree cover. And although it sounds counterintuitive, it's this withdrawal from the town that's triggering the most severe humanitarian catastrophe for Oleshky to date. Because if the last few years have been defined by occupation, bombardment, flooding, and food shortages, Russia still needed some basic businesses and services to keep working in Oleshky and have at least a few supply routes open to ensure that its own soldiers had what they needed. But now with the reconfiguration of logistics to avoid Ukrainian drones, Russia is discarding those services, rerouting those resources, and further cutting off roads so that supplies don't make it to the town's residents at all. If Russian soldiers don't need Oleshky to have working grocery stores, Oleshky's grocery stores suddenly no longer receive food shipments. Roads in and out of the city have only become more impassable over time, with Russia mining, drone striking, and reportedly outright shooting drivers. And with severed roads and power lines comes a halt of information flow on both sides. The reason you might not have heard much about Oleshky is that people remaining there don't have a stable way to communicate with the outside, and no journalists can travel there. It's really hard to get testimonies, let alone crisp images, from a town that's barely eking out survival behind enemy lines. Likewise, it's hard for residents to get up-to-date information from the outside, at least with any kind of consistency. Like in all territories occupied by Russia, there's no Starlink coverage, Ukrainian phone plans don't work, and if people get signal at all, they hit heavy censorship of the Russian internet. Before we go on, I have a quick note. Videos like this, as well as our articles, investigations, documentaries, newsletters, and more, are only possible because our community makes them possible. And this month, we're on a mission to grow our community to a whole new level, one where every member counts. When you become a member, you're not only directly helping the Kyiv Independent, but you also get some cool perks in return, like discounts on our merch and the ability to communicate directly with our newsroom. We're hoping to get 4,000 new members this month, and we'd love for you to be one of them. For more information, there will be a link to our membership page in the description below. Oleshky suffers the same fate as many frontline cities. It's used by Russia as both a staging ground for close-range aerial strikes on Ukrainian-controlled territory, while also acting as a shield for Russian troops within it. With the help of Pochutty Media, a media platform that covers life under Russian occupation, we received some written testimonies from people still in Oleshky. Most don't have consistent enough comms to hold phone interviews, so I'll just tell you some of the things they said. From resident Rosalia, we heard that people have gotten so used to the shelling that even when there's a line at the store and artillery shells are landing a block away, everyone just stands there. She went on to say that people have basements, they've made them somewhat livable for sleeping, but everyone's just sleeping in their homes, leaving it to fate, because they're just fed up. Another resident, Yevdokia, reported that the city is probably about 70% destroyed. It's very scary to live here, and it's even scarier to drive. So many cars have been blown up, so many people have died. It's not for nothing that they call it the Road of Death. Around 2,000 remaining residents of Oleshky, 47 of which are reported to be children, are in an extremely dire situation. Reports of daily life there tell of constant danger and deprivation, people drinking from stagnant wells, neighbors comparing dwindling supplies of canned food, bodies piling up around medical centers. And with the roads around the town full of landmines, guarded by Russian drones and patrolled by Russian soldiers, people can't get out of the town without risking death. Just to give you some idea of the scale, satellite footage published by the BBC in November showed that a single kilometer of road leading out of Oleshky had at least 8 destroyed vehicles littered along it. Those vehicles serve as warnings to others that one innocuous move or turn on a heavily mined road can mean death. A powerful psychological barrier, as well as a physical one. We spoke with a former resident of Oleshky who fled the town in March of this year. For security reasons, she asked to remain anonymous.
First, they started mining the road out of Oleshky. The cars that were taking people out were blown up.
The Russian military started laying mines on the roads, right?
Yes. So some managed to slip through, and some didn't. Some people left on their own, some with the help of volunteers. Many of those who left on their own returned because their cars were blown up. They walked back on foot. There were different routes. We went through Russia and Belarus to the Ukrainian border. That was our route.
How many days did your journey take?
On Thursday, we were already in Ukraine. We left on Monday. 4 days. But we only made a couple of stops. At night, all the hostels were full. We drove until morning, and then we took a break. They gave us a couple of hours to rest, and then we continued. The volunteers were very kind. Everything was well organized and streamlined. I am very grateful to them.
Many of those remaining are elderly or ill, or in some way need further assistance to leave than just a seat in a packed evacuation vehicle. And beyond needing assistance, older people can be less willing to leave their homes, particularly if they have property or pets or other assets that can't be brought along. There's also the cost factor. It takes money to get people out, and even those who can pay to arrange their escape from the city still need some way to pay for the rest of their journey and then to survive where they're going, which is again a concern that's exponentially more acute for pensioners and people with disabilities. Volunteers who spoke to the Kyiv Independent say that there are several hundred people waiting for evacuation from Oleshky, but that attempts can only be made to get small groups out at a time, and the risks are still high. The only way Oleshky's residents can get back to Ukrainian-controlled territory is to travel hundreds of miles through Russia and Belarus to enter from the north. And I want to reiterate that point because Oleshky is less than 5 miles from Ukrainian-controlled territory, but hundreds of miles from the only border point people are still able to cross. So just to be clear, residents can stay and starve or leave and risk violent death. And if they somehow manage to survive, they're then faced with a long and terrifying journey through enemy territory. Joining us to describe the situation is Alexander Tolokonikov, the deputy head of Kherson Regional Military Administration. Just generally speaking, can you describe the conditions in Oleshky right now?
Місто вже 4 роки залишається без світла.
The city has been without electricity for 4 years. The local morgue has been destroyed in an attack, and the invaders categorically forbid burying the dead. People there are practically abandoned to their fate. If a person is seriously injured, has been blown up by a mine, or has been hit by a drone, it is impossible to call an ambulance. Against the backdrop of this chaos, basic utility and social services have completely degraded. Russian doctors do not come to the city, and healthcare is virtually non-existent. Streets and communities are drowning in garbage that no one takes out, and local farmers are forced to give their crops to the Russians. This is far beyond what one would call a temporary occupation. I would call it an intentional genocide of Ukrainians and the destruction of the city by creating conditions of complete helplessness.
Why is Russia preventing people from leaving, especially old people or just non-threatening civilians?
Firstly, because this is a human shield. As long as there are people, we cannot strike at Oleshky, at the city, to take out the occupiers. The Russians also disguise themselves by dressing in the same clothes as the locals, so that they can move around without fear of an attack by a Ukrainian drone. So it is vital for them, otherwise we would have killed them all there.
And how are communications in the city? Like how much information gets in and out? How much service, signal do people have? Sort of what does that look like?
Well, it is difficult, of course. People cannot communicate. The signal is very bad. We are constantly putting pressure on the international community so that they, in turn, put pressure on the occupiers. This is yielding some results. Now at least they have started letting in volunteers who deliver food and evacuate people who agreed to be evacuated. So far, more than 100 people have been taken out in a month. But this is of course not much, when more than 2,000 remain there. So this is happening now, but it is still very dangerous for these volunteers. Recently, a volunteer who was delivering food was blown up, suffering shrapnel wounds and other injuries. So for the people who remain in Oleshky, the situation will only worsen in the future if Russia does not react. Moreover, this situation will spread. We see that the Russians want to spread this situation to the entire coastal zone. They are not worried about the people. They will even prevent people from leaving all coastal areas, because this is now a threat to them.
You might ask, aren't there international protocols about this kind of thing? Isn't it against the Geneva Convention to starve civilians in a war? Isn't there such a thing as a humanitarian corridor that's supposed to be set up in situations like this? The answer is yes, but so far attempts to establish one have failed. The Red Cross claims to be in talks with both sides, but thus far there isn't a clear proposed route or timeline for a humanitarian corridor, as more and more people die every day. The demand for a solution is high on Ukraine's side, but Ukraine can't solve this alone. It's also worth noting that, but doesn't the Geneva Convention forbid this, has consistently been a moot point when it comes to Russia's invasion. They've violated various international treaties and norms, from the use of chemical weapons to the inhumane treatment of POWs. And honestly, they've faced few consequences. There have been symbolic condemnations and calls for justice, but no signatory of pacts like the Geneva Convention has stepped in to actually stop Russia from continuing to break international law. The international community's responsibility and failure to act is particularly stark given how clearly Russia's infliction of harm on Oleshky is done in service of erasing the town's Ukrainian identity. In the aftermath of the flood, residents with Russian passports were offered aid, while those with only Ukrainian documents, or no documents at all, have been labeled as foreigners. And the fact that Russia has been so unequivocal about nationality as the basis for discernment reflects a larger debate about the invasion. At what point it fits the definition of genocide on Russia's part. Because after all, this isn't just about Russia gaining control of territory. It's an attempt to erase a specific identity that Russia has deemed incompatible with the future it's building. I'm joined now by my colleague Danilo Mokryk, who's actually made a documentary about Russia's genocidal acts and the difficulties in defining them as such. When we look at Oleshky in the last 5 years, there have been many war crimes on both an individual and wide scale against the civilian population. But at the same time, not every war crime is an act of genocide. How do you differentiate? What is the line?
Well, genocide is defined by the special intent behind the crime. The intent is to destroy a protected group, whether racial, religious, ethnical, or national, to destroy it in whole or in part. So you have to be very sure that the intent behind the crime, be it killing, be it harming the population, be it imposing conditions on the populations that are very difficult to survive, be it the forcible deportation of children, but there has to be the special intent to destroy the group in whole or in part. And well, I think that in all of our documentaries from the War Crimes Unit, we actually always find this intent to destroy the Ukrainian national group in whole or in part. Basically, it's in part, because it's very difficult, to erase a national group like completely. It doesn't work that way. There's too many Ukrainians for a, complete swiping genocide not to be too obvious. So they are just trying to erase this national identity. And this is what genocide is about. You have to destroy all those who identify as Ukrainians. You have to instill conditions that would force people to abandon the Ukrainian national identity. And that's why, for example, the forcible transfer of children is an act of genocide, because it makes them lose their identity. So it doesn't always have to be, physical per se. You just need to destroy the identity.
Yeah, and I think, forcing everyone to get Russian passports is a good example of that, trying to destroy the Ukrainian identity. And that's been very documented, but with it being so documented, what kind of can we ask of international bodies now? This is in violation of the Geneva Convention, of all of these treaties, but the international community isn't responding promptly. Kind of what can we ask of them at this point? What could we expect? What are they failing to do that we would hope they would?
Well, there still seems to be a legal discussion about whether there is genocide happening in Ukraine or not. But to me and to many scholars and to many international lawyers, the threshold of proof is already well behind us. So the issue is political, actually. Because, to recognize that there is genocide happening would put pressure on international community to intervene. And that's why they do not want to talk about genocide. They do not want to qualify what is happening in Ukraine as genocide. And it was the French president, Emmanuel Macron, who actually said that quite openly in an interview in 2022. He said, well, if we recognize that genocide is happening in Ukraine, that would mean that we have to intervene. And I don't think that we want to do that. He said that directly, and that was after Bucha. So the logic is very obvious. If we use the word genocide, it would put pressure on us to stop the genocide from happening. And they just don't want to get too involved in that.
I'd like to close this episode with a quick thought. This is the story of one town that's in a particularly dire set of straits, in a man-made crisis that demands immediate action before it's too late. But it's also an illustration of the value that Russia places on the lives of the people it claims to be liberating from Ukraine. At best, Russia has shown supreme apathy towards Oleshky's residents, using them as shields for airstrikes and not bothering to save them in the midst of flooding. And at worst, Russia is purging the region of its identity and cutting off all literal and metaphorical ways back. I know peace talks have stalled, but they'll inevitably kick back into gear at some point. Maybe keep Oleshky's residents in mind when foreign politicians start making out that it wouldn't be so bad if Ukraine were to cede more territory to Russia. It would.
Hi everyone, it's Dominic Calverwell here. I'm the business reporter for the Kyiv Independent, and I'm here to answer the community question of the week, which comes from Subtle Knife. Now, the 6th of June is the anniversary of the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam, which resulted in the draining of the Kakhovka reservoir. So, now the reservoir has mostly drained, but for a few channels, but is too dangerous for humans. Has it become a bit of a new wildlife sanctuary? And are there plans, official or unofficial, about what to do in the future when the region can be managed again? So it's an interesting question, and I was actually at the Kakhovka reservoir 2 years ago. 90% of the reservoir has been drained. And to be honest, the region around there is very hot. It's a lot of fighting. It's in the Zaporizhia and Kherson Oblasts, which are really contested areas. So, in my opinion, it's still too early to be talking about what to do with the reservoir there, or the drained reservoir. But what was really interesting when I visited was the fact that this natural forest has sprouted in an area that covers around the size of London, so 1,600 square kilometers. I mean, the total dam size, so the total reservoir size is massive. It's like the size of New York and London combined. So part of that is now covered in poplar and willow trees, and this was totally coincidental because when Russia blew up the dam, it was in June. And that happened to be the pollinating season. So all of these seeds from these trees were floating on top of the reservoir. And then once it was drained, they sunk into the ground and then they grew. And the expert I spoke to at the time, he predicted that there would be wild deer and boar running around the reservoir in a few years' time. So, I would love to say that Kakhovka will become this amazing reservoir, this amazing wildlife sanctuary, but to be honest, we just don't know what the future of that land will be.
That's all for this week. We'll be back next Sunday with more news from Ukraine. If you appreciated this video, please consider becoming a member of the Kyiv Independent community. And for those of you who join this month, you'll be taking part in a historic step forward for us. It's truly thanks to viewers like you that we can do this work, and we're so grateful for your support. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.